Welcome to NHK World Direct Time. It's nearly 20 years since the United Kingdom handed over its last significant colony, Hong Kong, to China. And our guest today, Christopher Patten, now Lord Patten, has a unique insight into the history. He was the last British governor there, and his policy of democratic reform often brought him into direct conflict with the government of the People's Republic of China. The recent Hong Kong elections were the first since the civil unrest in 2014. A number of radical pro-democracy candidates returned. We asked Lord Patten what he thought of their demands for independence as compared to more democracy.
I'm not remotely in favor of Hong Kong independence. I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't think it's possible. What I read into it is the almost inevitable consequence of China trying to cut off any debate about or movement towards greater democracy. The recent case of the abduction of Hong Kong citizens on the streets of Hong Kong wasn't a good sign. You stop people pressing for legitimate aspirations, for things that you've pretty well promised them, and they become more extreme in their opinions.
Christopher Patten came from a modest background. Born in London, he went to a Catholic school and then to Oxford University, before a successful career as a minister in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet. In 1992, he was appointed governor of Hong Kong, where his job was to negotiate the handover of the colony to China. From the start, he was determined to do things his way and to push for democratization. His most difficult times were in the direct negotiations with the Chinese.
I once made it clear to a Chinese interlocutor, one of the people I was negotiating with, that when Chinese officials talked to me about ensuring that they didn't lose face, they should remember that we had face too. I think they are bullies, and bullies, if you let them get away with it, go on bullying you. I actually think that the Chinese quite respect it when you stand up to them. I was rather flattered by being portrayed by Chinese propaganda as a sort of crazed democratic champion. What I was trying to do was to make an electoral process which had already been agreed as fair and open as possible. That's what we did. And I think one of the results is that we were able to spend 5 years as champions of the people of Hong Kong rather than as puppets of Beijing. Had 5 extremely happy years there. It had been the most interesting job that I'm ever likely to do. I had and have many friends in Hong Kong. I hugely admired the spirit of Hong Kong. And it's a great city, one of the great maritime cities in the world. So, yes, it was sad to leave.
Following his return to the UK, Lord Patten wrote a book, East and West, about his time in Hong Kong, and took the opportunity to reflect on broader issues relating to Asia and the West.
I'm not sure that I believe there's all that much difference between, quote, Eastern civilization, unquote, and Western. We're told that East Asia in particular is a Confucian society. You don't see much signs of Confucianism in Shanghai. As for the West being totally different, well, I think most societies, most advanced societies economically, are quite similar. Of course, we have different histories and different languages and different racial groups, but by and large, people want the same sort of things. We in the West should want to embrace Asia. We should want to be open to trade with Asia as we have been, and we should want to advocate in Asia the same sort of human rights that we advocate in Europe and North America. And we haven't always been very good at that. We've sometimes been judgmental and sanctimonious and hypocritical.
After Hong Kong was handed back to China, Lord Patten was appointed head of the European Union's Foreign Service, a job he held for 5 years. In his dealings with the resurgent Asia, he became convinced of the benefits of Europe acting as a large trading bloc. Britain's recent vote to leave the European Union is, he believes, a grave mistake for the country's relations with China.
I've been interested in the Chinese reaction, sort of semi-official reaction to Britain's vote to leave the European Union. And the Chinese have said, oh, we welcome this because it's going to make the British economy more dependent on us. Well, I think we should make sure that they get a different impression. I hope that things will go well. But I'm very skeptical about it. All the economists I respect think that Britain will inevitably grow less rapidly outside the single market and outside the European Union inside. I think that it would be surprising if this didn't turn into a slow-motion car crash.
Lord Patten is currently the Chancellor of Oxford University, having previously held the post of Chairman of the BBC. He writes regularly and extensively on world affairs, now with 4 books on the subject. He's a close China watcher, and despite his admiration for a country which is the world's largest manufacturing economy and exporter of goods, he believes its future is not as straightforward as it might seem.
China has enjoyed helter-skelter growth for a number of decades, but China today still has a per capita wealth which is about 1/5 of America's. You multiply it by the Chinese population, it's big. But China isn't going to be as wealthy in per capita terms as America or Western Europe, partly because China will get old before it gets that wealthy. By the 2040s, the largest population in the world will be Indian. Probably the second largest population group will be Chinese pensioners. It has a huge effect on the management of the economies, not just of Asia, but of the world. So China will be growing a lot less fast in the next few years, and that will have consequences, bad consequences, for the rest of us. So while I have some critical and, I think, realistic things to say about China, I don't remotely believe that China doing badly is in our interest. I think China doing well is fundamentally in our interest. China faces a dilemma. The hardliners in China say if the party continues to give up control over the economy, over state-owned enterprises, for example, sooner or later the party will lose control of the state. And the reformers say, unless the party gives up control over the economy, like the state-owned enterprises, we won't grow as fast. And in those circumstances, the party will certainly lose control over the state. And China's dilemma, it seems to me, is both those propositions are entirely correct. And the challenge for a Chinese leadership is to find a way in which it can steer through those rather thorny dilemmas. Chinese give the impression that you can only do business with them if you do what they want politically. It's drivel. The Chinese, by and large, there are some exceptions like Norwegian salmon, which has been put on one side because of the rows over the award of a Norwegian, the Nobel Peace Prize, to a Chinese dissident. And maybe that sort of thing has an effect for a bit, but by and large, the Chinese buy what they need at the price they think is the best. China is going to be a very significant player internationally, and we will have to try to ensure that China's more muscular nationalism doesn't produce a crisis in the South and East China Seas. I don't think China is going to replace the United States as the world's most significant superpower. I think in a lot of respects, China punches below its weight rather than above its weight. Nobody looks at the way China runs China and thinks that's the model for us. China's soft power is very limited. Who are China's great friends around the world? Venezuela, Zimbabwe, North Korea.
Lord Patten's observations of China and his extensive experience of international politics have given him a very clear view of what's needed to keep the world in order.
The whole of the world, including China, needs an international system based on rules which we all accept. Because the sort of problems that the world faces, the sort of problems which most individual countries face, however big they are, can't be dealt with by individual national action. The world needs more, not less, international cooperation within a framework of binding rules where necessary, which everyone accepts.